There is a type of science fiction genre that I love that doesn't really have a name. I would classify it as grounded science fiction. Movies from this category are either set in the near or very near future, and they usually have remnants from our time period, if not just being our time period with one or two technological advances. Where other science fiction stories focus more on the fantastic elements of their stories and the eccentric display of future technologies, grounded science fiction, I would say, has more contemporary and yet advanced technology, and their plots have much more to do with the experiences of their characters than the wonder of their stories. This seems to have been making a resurgence lately, which is great, but let's go back a bit to 2007 and talk about Sunshine. Sunshine is set in a future where the sun is burning out and humanity is facing extinction. The nations of the Earth have all come together to fund a project to restart the sun by basically detonating a small Big Bang device. Except that mission failed when its ship disappeared after losing contact with Earth due to interference from Mercury. Sunshine tells the story of a second and last ship sent, the Icarus II. The crew of the ship is basically comprised of the best. They even got Captain America as their head engineer.
We have a payload to deliver to the heart of our nearest star. We're delivering that payload because that star is dying, and if it dies, we die. Everything dies. So that is our mission. There is nothing, literally, nothing more important than completing our mission. End of story.
There's the Captain, Canada, played by Hiroyuki Sanada. I'm so glad he's getting a lot more Hollywood work now because he's been one of my favorite actors since The Last Samurai. Chris Evans plays the ship's engineer Mace. He's a no-nonsense, totally disciplined team member who hails from a military family. He just has some anger issues that he usually takes out on the ship's physicist. The ship needs a physicist to activate the device, who's played by Cillian Murphy.
It takes 8 minutes for light to travel from sun to Earth, which means you'll know we've succeeded about 8 minutes after we deliver the payload. All you have to do is look out for a little extra brightness in the sky.
I thought for the longest time that this character was actually played by Jared Leto, so it was a surprise to me to see Cillian Murphy instead. There's also the ship's pilot played by a very early Rose Byrne. She's a bit more emotional than the others, but she still fulfills her duties well. Michelle Yeoh plays the ship's biologist who takes care of the onboard garden, necessary for oxygen supply and food. Benedict Wong. Did you know his name actually is Wong? Crazy, right? Anyway, Benedict Wong plays their genius navigator. Then there's also the ship's communications officer, and also the ship's doctor, psychological officer, played by Cliff Curtis, also known as the typecast, ambiguously brown man. He has a weird obsession with the sun. Oh, and this is a cool thing. They have this little observation room where they can view the sun directly with filters that are so strong they can make the sun as visible as room light. This makes for a lot of really cool special effects. Speaking of special effects, for a film from 2007, where CGI was already mainstream even though it wasn't really there yet, this film uses it very sparingly. As far as I can tell, the ship is just a model, like the good old days, over a CGI background. And when they are forced to use CGI, they use the brightness of the sun or close camera angles to mask it. All of the sets are real, but they have these little bits and pieces of detail just to make it more realistic and look more grounded, as this genre demands. There's a lot of attention to detail that went into this. I especially love how instead of using some far-out futuristic computer interfaces, instead we just get tactile buttons and mounted equipment with very basic screens similar to what we would have on aircraft today. All of that is intermingled with personal details from each character, pictures, clothing, trinkets, stuff like that, to make these characters matter more. And that's what's actually really good too. I actually do care about the characters. And I care if they complete their mission, and I care who makes it back home. None of them make any stupid decisions for the sake of the plot moving forward. They all are actually the best at what they do. But due to the extreme stress of their mission and the environment that they're in, they do make mistakes and act out of passion sometimes. I think the film was marketed more as a sci-fi horror, but I prefer to watch it as a sci-fi adventure, where a competent crew has to overcome constant obstacles, and the mission is always in mind. I'll talk about this later, but there's also a horror element to it. So the story picks up when the ship is just about to pass Mercury. The crew is made aware that once they enter a certain point, they can no longer communicate back home with Earth. So they all try to make one last message home before reaching the point of no return. The physicist Kappa takes too long, and the engineer Mace doesn't get his chance. He goes with the psychologist Searle to cool off with a therapy program. Searle is kind of a weird character. He has this strange obsession with staring into the sun. He also acts very eccentric, but I don't know if that's just how he is, or it's some sort of sun craziness or something. But for some reason, they never go anywhere with this theme, even though it's brought up multiple times in the movie. Upon approaching the sun, they discover a distress beacon from the first ship that was also blocked by Mercury. The crew discusses the idea of rerouting the ship to salvage anything from the first ship and save anybody who's still on board. Some think that the mission is top priority and they should just continue on their course. Others think that it would be worth the effort to salvage the device that's unused on the first ship to increase their chances of success. After all, the device is totally theoretical and they have no idea if it actually works. So having two would increase their odds. They decide to reroute and change course for the first ship, but the ship's navigator forgets to realign the mirrors on the giant shield that protects them from the sun, and the oxygen wing is destroyed in the process. The crew must also repair the damaged mirrors or it will destroy the ship. Once they repair the mirror, now they have no choice but to go to the first ship because they need the oxygen that they lost from their oxygen garden to reach the critical point to detonate the device. Anything beyond is pretty much a spoiler, so I won't go further into the plot. As I mentioned before, there is a horror element. While I don't think it's really bad, I just feel like it comes really late into the film. That's the only thing I didn't really like about this movie. That they didn't really need to introduce this horror element on top of everything else. I think that the idea of just trying to be humanity's last-ditch effort to restart the sun, or everybody dies, on top of surviving in a very hostile environment, is enough. I wonder if it was the studio's decision to do this since Danny Boyle's horror film 28 Days Later did so well. I will say that this is not a paranormal horror film, if that's what you were looking for. I thought it was going in. There is a level of suspension of disbelief, but it's still somewhat grounded in reality. So what do I think of Sunshine? I think that I put it off for way too long because right now I consider it one of the essential science fiction films of the modern era. It's really good to see an intelligent science fiction horror thriller movie because science fiction films are a dime a dozen these days and there are only a handful of really good ones. And unlike similar science fiction films, the characters in this movie don't make stupid decisions to advance the plot. They're not idiots for the sake of writing. Instead, they make the best decisions available to them at that time, and the factors involved in those are out of their control anyway. So it's really just a matter of hoping for the best and going into the unknown. Please watch this if you get a chance. It's a very good movie.